Hey everybody, this is Perch. I don't want to be fatalistic with this video. This video is probably going to sound more negative than positive, but not in the way I'm not bitching about somebody. It's more negative in terms of being optimistic about the future. There's a whole dialogue going on right now where suddenly people have figured out manga. And in many ways, you got to hand it to Kelly Sue DeConnick for, pointing out we should talk about manga like, 5, 6 years ago. And nobody did from at least her side of the industry. Manga's been one of these things that it goes in, it's like a weird trend. The US comics market wants to completely ignore it, or then it wants to dismiss it, or then it wants to praise it and talk about how amazing it is, but not actually learn anything from it. It goes in these very weird circles. The one thing I notice is that the artists tend to be a lot more open to talking about and learning about manga than the writers. The artists tend to be kind of, I think, in this kind of excited way, blown away by some of the detail and some of the backgrounds and certainly some of the pace at which manga is created. Artists tend to really like manga, or at least like to talk about, like to think about it as a medium. Whereas a lot of writers seem to want to point out more of the differences. And like, it would never work over here because blank. And there's some pretty funny threads. I should go back and kind of capture them, where a number of pretty high profile writers, I know Bendis had made these comments before, but others as well, of why manga content will never really work here in the US. And this, of course, was before the last 3 years or so when manga exploded in the US. Now, to be fair about it, and I do think if you're one of the people who's kind of really championing manga and kind of delighting in the idea that manga is doing well in the US, then you do need to at least acknowledge that manga did have a pretty big bust here. Several, and I don't mean that in terms of Aiko's cup size. I mean just it blew up. Manga, it kind of a couple times in the '90s. There was this brief attempt at manga, and then it didn't really go very far. The U.S. comic market was kind of exploding around the same time. It did give us a lot of comparisons to like Joe Mad and his art being kind of manga inspired, for whatever that meant. But in general, it didn't get that much traction. We did see the Marvel Mangaverse at one point that Ben Dunn, sorry, he helped put together. But the manga did come back in the early 2000s, and it crashed pretty hard. It had a brief kind of surge of success, and then it kind of collapsed. Part of why it collapsed is I think more people were looking at it in terms of anime, and there just wasn't the infrastructure available. I remember, was it like Suncoast Video and places like that were making a lot of ground selling Tenchi Moyo and stuff like that in the '90s. And then it collapsed basically because you couldn't get the material out. It was too expensive. Buying it like VHS to VHS, people started to complain about the dollar to value mechanism. Like, I'm going to spend $30 on this video that is like 2 20-minute episodes. It's just it wasn't good value. But streaming and being able to have these kinds of services, being able to have digital and all the rest, has really brought manga into the forefront. All right, that's too much of a history lesson. Anyway, the purpose of this video is people have asked, what can the US learn from manga? And this is probably the negative side of me that says probably not much. And what I mean by that is I think in order to be open to learning from manga, and when you say learn from manga, I mean like take some of what they're doing well and adapt it into a US comic style. You're going to have to be willing to accept a number of things. One of those things being, man, I hate starting with this, but it's like the elephant in the room. Manga does lean into fan service and pretty women and other things, and they're not shy about that. In fact, in many ways, the kind of the general zeitgeist of manga as it was in Japan, there was a period of time where people were like, I don't know about these the overly sexist images and stuff like that in Japan, and it just never went anywhere. People said that, and people were like, yeah, but that's what people like. And it was very matter of fact. I remember Square Enix, or when it was just Squaresoft, went through this period a bit where it was like, I don't know about these, big-breasted, sexy kind of images, and and so they briefly flirted with. I remember there was like Final Fantasy X or X, which was focused on the ladies of the game, and but there was some very weird attempts that never really went anywhere. And that's like a 10-hour video, and there's plenty of places that talk about kind of how this all rolled across Japan. But there was one kind of cultural pragmatism that I think exists in Japan that we struggle with in the US. And it's like, well, I may not like this, but that's what sells. Or I want to keep getting money, so therefore that is what I will do. And I won't think too bad about it because I don't want to make my life terrible, being humiliated and ashamed of what I do. I'm just going to kind of accept it. That manga seems to get there much quicker, much easier, and with acceptance. By the way, I'm going to draw a really bizarre parallel here, but I was talking to a friend just last night, who's in Japan that I worked with, and good, very good friend, as close to a brother as I would call it. And we were talking about the mask mandate, and he's like, I still don't understand why the Americans won't wear masks. And I said, well, it got very hung up in, do you have the right to tell me I have to wear a mask or don't have to wear a mask? And he's like, we don't tell people they have to wear a mask. In Japan, it's just very shameful if you don't wear a mask. Because if you don't wear a mask, it's kind of like you're saying, I don't care if other people get sick. So you don't need a law. You don't need people, yelling at you, wear a mask. It's just, it's like, it's for the good of others. And we were kind of going back and forth, and I don't think we were fully communicating, because it's tough. In the U.S., back during World War II and kind of some of these other moments where self-sacrifice was a big deal, I think people had a better understanding of some of this stuff, of things like, this is an inconvenience to me, I don't like it, but it's for the good of everyone else. And you wouldn't dream of putting a law in place. That would be absurd. In fact, if anything, the law would make people want to resist, which is kind of what I think we just saw in the US with mask mandates. But culturally, we're no longer at a place where collectively we can say, hey, this is probably for the good of everyone, so we're going to do it because it's just the right thing to do, not because we're forced to do it. Being forcing people to do it is offensive. And it's a way of thinking. It's very deep. It's a nuance. It's a way of thinking that I think is very present in other countries, and sometimes not in the U.S. And I think that is a shame. I think the U.S. kind of lost that. That's not true everywhere. But anyway, I've gotten kind of off track. Why this is important for manga is because there's a certain aspect to how that business works in terms of a general acceptance for the material that's made there, for kind of the community that's there, for the culture that's there. There's a lot of things that people get hung up on in the U.S. around either making comics or reading and enjoying comics that just kind of come across as weird or absurd in Japan. Like, for example, this whole conversation around, hey, I'm making this niche product, but people should find that popular. And in Japan, that would just be, nobody would be able to parse that thinking. To some extent, another part of the conversation, we were talking about Pride Month. And the idea of a Pride Month in Japan is also sort of weird. In Japan, it's like either you go all in on a holiday, or you just, why the idea, because I think in Japan, people hop to kind of the consequences of the statement a little quicker, which is to say, wait a minute, we want people to be proud of, and accepting, tolerant of different genders, different sexualities. Why would we make a month for that? Shouldn't that just be the way people are? It's like it's not Pride year, it's not Pride forever. It's just we anyway. It's you. Hopefully you get what I'm saying. It's just a different way of thinking. So as we talk about what can the U.S. learn from manga, maybe a shorter way to say it is they have to be willing to learn. And I think culturally there's certain aspects to kind of the overall how the business works and how people interact with the business that I don't know that people in the U.S. want to listen to or they want to hear. And I think it's, and in many cases, look, there's a lot of details here. Pay is probably worse for some people in Japan. in manga. Not probably, it is. A lot of the lower area manga is you don't get paid as much, and that's a consequence. And pay is already low in the U.S. So how is that going to even work? There's more of an aggressive, I think, cutoff for when if something's not selling, then there's not a oh, this is bad, we should do something about this. There's a, oh well, it didn't work. There's a general acceptance of failure that I think a lot of stuff in the U.S. struggles with. We want to we want certain things to be successful, whether the facts support that or not. So I don't know that I just culturally I don't know that manga and the U.S. stuff fit. I think I'd love to think that we can take the best out of both systems. You always think that, we'll learn from each other, and the end product will be better as a result. But if the cultures are so radically different, if the thinking is so radically different, and if people are just operating from completely different places, then it's not going to work. You're not going to learn something because your basis, your ground, your starting place is just in a completely different orbit. But maybe that's too negative. So help me out here. Tell me I'm wrong. By all means, I would love to hear that. Let me give me some hope. And thanks for listening.